How's that? The microphone working? Woo! That's not quite what I meant to do. I'm going to fix this a little bit. Sorry about that. Just doing some last minute adjustments to the camera. There's Sandy. Hey, Sandy. How's it going? And I see we have Kriegs and Frank the Tank and Beetle Guy, Zero Cool, RI Naturalist, Theropod Hunter. Greetings. Can everybody see these lovely blooms behind me, the blossoms in the Kentucky Yellowwood tree? I see Dawn's here as well. Oh, there's all kinds of people here. I missed some of them from before. Wendy Hickson's here. Jose Miguel Sandoval Torrico is here. Don Gallagher is here. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting in front of the stuff. The camera there, I don't want to do that. Sweet. Sean Meister, the Pokemon, Tennyson, Sky. Wow. Shane's Worlds, Green Jedi Monkey, Frosty Inverts. Awesome. Got lots of people here. I'm actually going to open up. I see Mr. and Mrs. Morelia just popped in too. I'm going to pull up the chat on another screen here so that I can see what's going on without having to look at, like scroll around on that camera because that's not great, right? Let's see if I can get there. One second here. Trying to get it working. There we are. I think I got it. Okay. Yes, now I can see the chat, and that's awesome. I can see the likes live, which I've never really done before, which is cool. So I'm going to be experimenting just a little bit with this configuration where I have the iPad here so I can read it. I can read the comments without touching that screen, looking at this screen. So J-Man is here as well. Excellent. And thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Morelia, for reminding everybody to like the stream. I don't know how well the blossoms are coming out on camera. I can't really tell, but hopefully you can see the beautiful blossoms in the tree behind me. Maybe I'll switch the camera around so you can get a better look at it. I see we do have 31 likes, which is great. I'm also going to hop into Patreon, answer a couple of Patreon questions. Wanted to start that out. But I noticed that Theropod Hunter managed to introduce another person to the isopod hobby, which is fantastic. That's great. So Jill E. from Patreon says, is there an easy way to tell dwarf white isopods from the young of other isopod species? I thought I might be getting some all-white Porcellio spinicornis babies, but now have started to worry that I might actually be growing a culture of dwarf whites. I purposely have avoided keeping dwarf whites because of their tendencies to invade other species' enclosures. Thanks. Well, there's a lot you can do to check if you have the right equipment, but here's a couple of ideas that may be able to help. If you can get some decent macro shots of them, dwarf whites have eyes that are a bit different from other isopods. They typically have just one ocellus. You know, a lot of isopods have ommatidia where they have basically compound eyes, and that is true of most of the isopods in the hobby. But Trichorhinatomentosa, the dwarf white, has basically one. And so it looks a little smaller and it looks different. If you can get some decent magnification on that, a lot of cell phones will give you pretty decent magnification, or a simple macro lens, maybe something like that. If you're able to get a hold of something like that, you can look and see that they only have that one ocellus on each side. So that can help. Another thing that you can do is look at them from underneath. If you can catch a decent group of them, because they are parthenogenic, and you look at them from underneath, again, probably under magnification would be ideal. You can see if any of them have marsupia, or the brood pouches. And so I would say scoop 20 of them into a deli cup if you can, and then look from underneath a clear deli cup or other container with a clear bottom, whatever you've got. Look at them and see if you see any marsupia there, because you are likely to see marsupia with 20 of them, because they are parthenogenic, you're very likely to see marsupia on any of them that are adult size or even close to adult size. And so that can kind of help you. So that will make a difference. That usually will help you identify. If you see none of them with a marsupium, then and you've got 20 of them and they are about the adult size of dwarf whites, then it's pretty likely they're dwarf whites. It's not impossible, but it's pretty unlikely. But then again, look at the eyes, and that's another way to tell. So there are more complicated ways to tell, but I think those are two of the easiest for someone to do with, reasonably simple equipment. You don't have a scanning electron microscope available, that kind of thing. I think those are two ways that you could use that would be helpful. Hope that helps. It's a great question, Jill. And Sandy Skinks has a question too. Sandy says, do you agree with the theory that our isopods will only grow in number according to the size of their bin? If so, how does that happen? Deaths by cannibalism or not enough food to go around? Thanks. Okay. Well, great question. And I would say it doesn't have a simple answer. Great question, not a simple answer. And the reason is because and you kind of hit the nail on the head, Sandy, when you're talking about how does that happen, and you're talking about some resources that could be limited, like food. That food is a limiting factor with isopods, and so if you have them in a bin where you're feeding them plenty of foods that they always have food available, and you have another bin that's the same size, and food is a limiting factor, you're likely to get, you're going to have smaller numbers most likely in that bin, all other factors being equal. So food can be a factor. Cannibalism can be a factor. One thing that Oren McMonigal says in his book Isopod Zoology is that you have to really crowd isopods, and I hope I'm paraphrasing this properly. Basically says you have to really crowd isopods and really starve them to get a whole lot of cannibalism. You might get a little bit, when an isopod gets injured, okay, all bets are off. They're going to eat it. There's no question. We've all had that problem where we're moving something around to the bin and we accidentally squish one. At least that's happened to me a couple of times, more than once, more than twice. And the other isopods immediately turn on it and begin eating it, and it wasn't a problem before. A mismoult might cause the same issue. So if they're really crowded and they're really hungry, though, they might start eating each other even when there aren't, there's not one that's squished. So that could happen. But I think food, space, quality of food can all play a part there. I do think size of bin has some bearing on how big the population gets, for sure, but it also depends on species. Some species can tolerate higher densities and crowding, and some species can tolerate different food quality levels. Like some species seem to reproduce much better when they have a lot of leaf litter, and other species don't seem to care as long as they do have plenty of food. Like Porcelionides pruinosus is pretty well known for being able to eat almost anything and breed on it, whereas some other species need a lot of that leaf litter to keep reproducing really effectively. I think it was Kyle of Roach Crossing, explained it like this. He says, Venezilo parvis, under the right conditions for it, your substrate can basically become Venezilo parvis. The density is extraordinarily high. And we've all seen colonies of isopods like that, where the density is very high. I've had dwarf white colonies like that, and so on, where there's just, isopods everywhere. They're just everywhere. So I think it's a complicated situation. Size is one factor, food is a factor, quality of food is a factor, but it's a little bit more complicated than just the size of the bin. That would be my vote on that. So hope that makes sense. It is a good question, Sandy, and I think you're still here to be able to answer and additionally comment on that. So if you have any other follow-up questions on that, that would be great. I would be happy to answer them. I'm going to try to make this a little bit higher. I can see them both, and it kind of looks like I'm looking at the screen the whole time, even when I'm reading comments. Let's see if that works. This is kind of, technological experiment. See how this goes. So I just saw Green Jedi Monkey had a comment about any tips for preventing dwarf whites from teleporting in other bins, and we will talk about that. I just noticed I had a super chat. So Mr. and Mrs. Morelia, thank you. How are you pre-decomposing your leaf litter and their downsides to making slimy leaves for your isopod bins? Okay, great question, and I will get back to your question, Green Jedi Monkey. Pre-decomposing your leaf litter. I am putting it in a plastic bin, just like a large, really large isopod bin. And then I am adding water and a little bit of molasses. That's something I learned from Kevin Nasser. And then I put it out in my storage shed and let it sit there. And it's a ventilated bin, so that there's some oxygen and so on going on. Uh, Gas exchange, fairly well ventilated bin, and just leaving it there, letting it sit. And there may be some downsides to making slimy leaves for the isopod bins. I think if you're doing it indoors, the biggest one would be the smell, because it does smell really funky. Since I have it outside in my storage shed, that's 25, 30 feet from the house. Not a big deal. But that could definitely be an issue. It can attract some insects as well. Things you have to be careful not to farm mosquitoes in it. So I have like screens. I believe I have screens on mine. I'll have to go check um, to try to prevent. You may have to try to prevent insects like mosquitoes from getting in there and breeding, because that's not cool, unless you're feeding them all off to something. And then what else? Here's one thing. When you get really slimy leaves with that kind of oily slick, that can be lipids and proteins. That's what that is. It's both lipids and proteins that are on the surface of the water. That can be an environment in which mycobacteria can proliferate, and mycobacteria are not awesome. They can become pathogenic. They cause problems in fish tanks. They can, if they get into your body, like sometimes what happens is someone will pick up a fish that has some mycobacterium on it, and a spine from the fish will get into their skin, and then they'll get a nodule there that will form a granuloma, they call it. I think that's the technical term. Yeah, granuloma, where those bacteria will form, and it can be hard to get rid of infections like that. So mycobacteria potentially could be an issue if it's really, there's a lot of lipids at the surface, because those bacteria tend to like that kind of stuff. So those are a couple of downsides, I think, potential ones. Hopefully that helps. It's a great question, Mr. and Mrs. Morelia, and thank you for the super chat. So Green Jedi Monkey, I'm going to come back to your question about preventing dwarf whites from teleporting into other bins. I did make a video about that, and I would recommend watching that, but I want to answer you here too. So a couple of things to think about. Dwarf whites, I would keep your dwarf whites far away from other bins, as far away as possible. If that's impossible, keep them under other bins only, not above. And make sure that you keep the bins the dwarf whites are in clean, that they don't have a lot of scratches on them, that you're wiping down things like dust and buildup that can build up on the inside of the container, and then the isopods can crawl up. Don't mist the sides of the container, because they can climb up the mist. Gasket tubs are good ones. That's something that Tennyson just mentioned right now, I noticed on the screen. That can help a lot. And let's see what else. Very much so, when you're working in that bin, make it the last bin you work in, or wash your hands thoroughly between bins, and or both. Both would be great, I think, if you can do both. So hopefully that helps. It's a great question, and I think that if you keep those things in mind, that can really help. So Tennyson, I just noticed you said, am I weird for love of dwarf whites? No, they're really useful and they're cool. It's just it just depends on, are you willing and able to work with that risk? And if you are, and you can manage the risk, it's not a problem. I don't see why it's a problem for you to love them. But I got to tell you, if you're getting some Carinus acosta, we need to talk, because those are parthenogenic amblypygids, for those of you who might not know. And I need some, Tennyson. So let's talk. If you end up getting some and you get them reproducing, can we talk? Seriously, we got to talk. Okay. I would love to get into Carinus acosta. And Susan Becker, hello, asking about hermit crabs. I actually used to keep hermit crabs. I like hermit crabs a lot. I used to keep them long before I kept isopods, many, many years ago. And back then, the husbandry information that was provided was not great. And so I had limited success, only got a few successful molts out of the hermit crabs, and said, I don't think the information in the hobby is where it needs to be. I'm going to stop keeping hermit crabs now until the information gets better. And I haven't gotten back into it. Someday I might. Anyway, there's a lot of debate on potential isopods that might be good for hermit crabs. In fact, some of the first research I did on hermit crabs, sorry about the airplane going by, um, I think um, some of the first information I got about isopod, some of it was about hermit crabs, because just hermit crab keepers and dart frog keepers were the only people keeping isopods bioactive at the time, mostly. And it's the only information that was really out there available. You can keep a lot of different types of isopods successfully with hermit crabs. I would recommend one that's not particularly fast breeding and not particularly protein hungry and not a burrower. So you could do something like Porcellonides pruinosus, which does like a lot of protein but doesn't really burrow, and so it wouldn't be that much of a problem since you have a proper burrowing substrate for your hermit crabs when they're molting. Some people have done fine with Armadillidium species as well, so those could be a couple. I have never kept them, so you do have to take my information with a grain of salt. Okay. So Tennyson, I would imagine that Heidi fruit flies would be a pretty good feeder for them. Um, from what I've heard, that can be used. Dwarf whites would seem like a pretty solid option too. I'm wondering if confused flower beetle larvae might be good. And I'm sure you're working on some small roaches for them, uh, because I bet there are roach nymphs, climbing roach nymphs that would be good ones as well. Have you talked to Kyle about that? Bet he'd have some good ideas for you. Theropod hunter, Telson spike millipedes available in the USA. Not that I know of, but that doesn't mean they're not here. That just means I don't know about them. And mysopods, I kind of know what you mean, even though dwarf whites can be really useful. Um, and mysopods, Florida fasts can hop bins too. Although you know what I had? I had Silisticus convexus hop into my Florida fast bin, which is kind of ridiculous, but it happened. Oh, Jane's World, Pletiarthurus, kind of a, yeah, an alternative to dwarf whites. That makes sense. Frosty inverts, Triceratops beetles sound really cool. Um, an insect or arachnid that you wish would be more available. Okay. Let's see. Well, a lot of beetles should be more available. It would be cool if they were more available. Triceratops beetles sound awesome, actually. A lot of the big beetles that are popular in some of the Asian hobbies, Asian bug hobbies, I wish we could get them more over here. A lot of them are, not available here because of permits and so on. But I think it would be cool if we could have them. Another one that I wish were more available, but I understand why it isn't in the U.S. is there are a lot of the phasmids, because they can be plant pests, and but it would be really cool if we could have more of them in the hobby. I think there's so many I could go on, but there's a few ideas there. Red Lily Dragon, congrats on your baby Peacecaber Lawas and your pandas. Awesome. So Dawn, Japanese magic potions. Okay. Are they the very new line of Japanese magic potions or the classic line? Because they're quite different. Japanese magic potions are basically, they're Dalmatian Armadillidium vulgare. They're very cool, but they're sort of a misnomer because the term magic potion really only applies to the American ones, in that they were line bred for increased yellow coloration, and the Japanese line, the classic Japanese magic potion line, was not. But they're very cool. I have a pretty robust colony of them. They've done well for me, and I think they're a cool isopod. They don't get as big as the American line magic, the true American line magic potions. And there's probably been some mixing in the hobby, unfortunately, because of the confusion with the name. So they're pretty easy to take care of. Sometimes they can take a while to get breeding. That's true of American line magic potions as well. But once they get going, no particular problems, just as simple to keep as any other Armadillidium vulgare. And hopefully that helps, Don. It's a great question. So Ramingo, interesting. Well, it kind of depends on what type of beetle it is. It could be a lot of different types of beetles, a lot of different different. It has a potential to be many different types of beetle. So we'll just have to see what it is. Kind of got Schrodinger's pupa there, or Schrodinger's larva, I guess. What I would try to do if you really want to try to keep it, is try to replicate the situation in which you found it. Sometimes finding a grub in your garden, you may not know what it's eating, what it was eating. You may not be able to do a whole lot in terms of giving it what it needs, to be honest, because you don't know what species it is. But if you can replicate the environment in the immediate vicinity of where you found it, you might have a reasonable chance of getting it to pupate, especially if it's close to pupation, and then see what happens. And then you'd have to go from there once you identify it. So Mr. and Mrs. Merrily, great question about isopod species that reproduce through parthenogenesis other than dwarf whites. There are several out there that seem to be reproducing by dwarf whites, and there's some indications that certain others can do it sometimes, which is interesting. Nagurus cristatus, I believe, the dwarf striped or the dwarf gray, sometimes called, is thought to be parthenogenic. I think, let's see, Isopodus species tarragona is thought to be parthenogenic too. So there's a couple. Let's see. Oh, there's a couple more. Trichoniscus species that Tennyson mentioned too. Good point. So Luke, I am your father. Which species of isopods do I keep with my garter snakes? I do. Um, I keep two different species with my garters. In a couple of garter enclosures, I have Porcelionides prunos. They do well. They do really well in there. And in another enclosure, I keep Porcelio dilatatus, the giant canyon, and they do really well in there as well. So those are the species that I'm using right now. I guess there's one more. I also keep Montenegro, the Armadillidium klugi Montenegro, which did well for a while, but they also munched on plants a little bit too much. So I do still have some of those, but I'm trying to kind of change that so that there's something that's less likely to eat plants. So mysopods with me, grubs is kind of a catch-all term for various insect larvae. So grubs can apply to beetle larvae. It can also apply to lepidopteran larvae like moth larvae. It can apply to fly larvae. It can apply to a lot of things. It's not a very technical term at all. So it's just used to apply to, any kind of larva, basically, that as a general term. So that is the I've heard grubs applied in that way. And green Jedi monkey, that's a very good question. It could be the Wolbachia bacteria. It could be the it's hard to say, but I have heard of that being an awesome. I've heard that being a possibility. So Daniel Schiavo, I've noticed these things really tiny black things crawling in my Cresties tank sound like they could be mites, perhaps, or abatid mites. And those are not particularly problematic usually, but if you already have isopods in there, if they are reptile mites, now that's an entirely different matter. Reptile mites are bad news, and you need to take care of them. So you should probably, but say you mentioned you see them crawling on the food dish and on the cork bark. That doesn't sound particularly like reptile mites. You probably want to examine your crested gecko carefully to see if they have any mites lodged in the skin, behind scales, different kinds of things like that. So you'd want to make sure that they aren't that, rule it out. I've never dealt with reptile mites with my cresties, but you just want to make sure you're ruling that out. But they are probably something like Orobatid mites, which are not a big deal with cresties. So I would say if you don't already have isopods and springtails in them, put those in there because they will help out compete the mites. And Tennyson Kingsley, that is a good point. They could be globular springtails as well. And I have experimented very slightly with putting isopods with jumping spiders, mostly only as food for the isopods. For the jumping spiders, I put some Porcellonides pruinosis. I have had one or two jumping spiders pick it up, chew on it for a minute, and drop it. So they weren't too excited about it. I am a little concerned about. You could probably do a setup where isopods couldn't reach the spider, and then I think it would probably be okay. But I would worry about isopods with spiders. So, oh, Frank the Tank, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, we have a lot of people in the stream, over 50 at the moment, so that's awesome. And if you haven't liked the stream, everybody, please go ahead and do that. That would be fantastic. So, Susan, do you have any thoughts on the Lacey Act Amendment they're trying to pass and how it will affect isopods? The last time the Lacey Act Amendment that was very similar to this one tried to pass, my reaction was to write my representatives to spread the word, to make donation to USARC, and I think that's what I need to do this time too. They're trying to basically get the same thing through, and they're probably just going to try to do it and say, oh, everybody fought last time. If we do it again, they're less likely to fight. Human nature, we're less likely to fight the second time it happens. So we need to make sure that we do. And fight in a civil manner, in an articulate manner, and so we need to keep working against it. So RI Naturist, the Lacey Act amendments were dropped from the America Competes Act bill or whatever version it ended up being, but someone else is trying to push it through again. So everybody please start writing your representatives again, go to USARC and update yourself on what's going on. I actually need to do that because I only recently heard about it the second time again. So everybody please go check out USARC and see what's going on and see who you need to write. And last time they did have a whitelist was part of the idea. So that's not necessarily new. It may be worded a bit differently this time, but there was a whitelist. They were going to propose a whitelist. Still a danger for us because who knows what's going on that whitelist. Probably not very many things. And so we need to be careful. That's the problem with the whitelist is that they're probably only going to whitelist a very few things, and those of us who keep exotic creatures are going to be out of luck. So yeah, definitely important to update ourselves on that. I need to get on that soon. Ruben Daly. Let's see. I have kept some predatory beetles, but I haven't worked with six-spotted tiger beetles, so I'm not sure how that would work. One thing I can say, everyone, it's upsetting that they're doing it again, but we won once. We can do it again. We had enough people who responded, in an articulate, calm manner, demonstrating how we felt, giving our logical reasons why this was not a good idea. We just need to do it again. As long as enough people do it, they'll listen. Right, Mysopods. And thanks, RI, for coming by and joining in. Good to have you here. Oh, Tennyson. So have you worked with fire brats? That's awesome. That tiger beetles love those. I didn't know that. That's good to know. Are you culturing fire brats, or do you just capture them? I know you can find fire brats around here. Tennyson is fairly local to me. We live in the same state, not too far away. Hmm. I really love tiger beetles. They're one of the first beetles that when I was a kid, I was around, how old was I? Must have been around 9 when I started attempting to catch the tiger beetles that lived around my house. They were so beautifully iridescent blue and or green tiger beetles, and very hard to catch. But I ended up succeeding. I just spent hours over several days trying to catch one. They're so aware of what you're doing, such good flyers. They're pretty crazy. They're very cool. Okay, Tennyson, got it. Yeah, metallic green tiger beetles are amazing. Their jaws, their mandibles are just incredible. When I did finally catch that first tiger beetle, I was unprepared for the mayhem that it was about to unleash upon me at the age of 9 with those jaws. It was those mandibles are incredible. They're not only large for the size of the beetle and very powerful, that they're serrated. So the larvae of tiger beetles are pretty interesting. A lot of them will dig a burrow and kind of sit at the edge, and they act as ambush predators there. And when a suitable prey item comes along near them, they grab it, which is pretty cool. Um, I have not attempted to raise them, but that's how they work. At least some of them do that. But I've kept a few predatory beetles, not for huge amounts of time yet, but of course I have a lot of predatory aquatic beetles right now that you've probably seen on the channel that I really enjoy, like the Dinutus giant whirligig beetles and the various diving beetles, from the sunburst diving beetles and the um, gold band beetles and different things like that. So Luke, I am your father. Are there wolf spiders where you live? Yes, we have Hogna carolinensis here, among others. Um, we have another couple of species, I think, in the genus Hogna, and I've seen Helluo tigrosa. I guess wolf spiders is kind of a term that includes a lot of different spiders, but yeah. When I was a kid, we had a Hogna carolinensis run. Somebody opened the door, the front door. I guess I wasn't a kid. I was already married, actually, but it's been a few years. And I remember I was at my parents' house visiting, and somebody opened the door, and a Hogna carolinensis ran through the door and into the front closet. Just, it's just right across from the door there. Ran into the front closet, and my sister freaked out. She was, she's like 10 years younger than me, and was still at home, and really kind of freaked out and said, "A giant spider just ran into the closet." And I said, "Oh yeah, you guys always talk about big spiders. It's like the size of a quarter, and big deal." So I went to go get this spider with a jar, and the spider was so big it filled the bottom of the jar because it was a Hogna carolinensis. So we do get them here. I don't see them often. I think I've seen probably two or three since, but they're pretty cool. I do like them. Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Millie, another super chat. Totally off topic, but so you can live vicariously through us, we just got our first old world tarantula, Poecilotheria metallica, or Goody sapphire ornamental. Awesome. Congratulations. Those are so gorgeous. I love it. So yeah, I let me know how that goes. I would love to get some updates on that, see some pictures or video or anything like that. That's fantastic. Congratulations on the first old world. Hope it goes well for you. For those of you who are wondering about why old world is significant, there are a couple of reasons why. One, old world, this is not universal, but new world tarantulas tend to have urticating hairs, and that's not something you need to worry about as much with old world tarantulas. But old world tarantulas tend to be, venom can be more intense, more medically significant, and like I said, not universal, but that is often true. And they tend to be kind of faster than New World tarantulas. So Tennyson, can you remember to um, message me about the Carinus acosta at some point. Let's see, Don, do you know when you might release some night golds into the hobby? To you. Okay. Well, I am releasing the B grade, and some of the B grades turn out nice. Some of them just turn out normal, like normal Armadillidium vulgare, but I am releasing those, so let me know. I'm happy to do that. I think it's been a lot harder to isolate the night golds than I was hoping, and part of that is just me having so many things going on that I'm not culling as often as I should and separating them out. Um, but yeah, so Tennyson. Okay, you can get me in contact with someone who knows. Okay, may have some right now. Okay, yeah, I would love to know about it. And when you're talking about slow breeders, you're talking about the Carina Acosta, and that's fine. If they're parthenogenic, I don't need to worry about it too much. I'll just get a couple and get a colony going, and if it takes a while, I'm good. I'm just fascinated with the fact uh, that they're parthenogenic and that they are so small that I can feed them things like fruit flies and small isopods, springtails, and things like that. That's fantastic. I love amblypygids, and I just right now I've only worked with Diadema. I have 2 Diadema right now, but I'd kind of like to branch out into some others, some of the communal ones like Carina Acosta. So Shane's Worlds has a question about breeding rates. Um, One of my favorite isopods are P. werneri, not just because it looks so like a trilobite, because of its slow seasonal breeding. Good point. For me, maybe I'm just in the right season, but every time I look at the Porcelia werneri, it seems like there are more of different sizes in there. And maybe, like I said, this is just the season for them to breed. And they do look a lot like a trilobite too. And definitely in the top 5 contenders of most likely to be mistaken for a trilobite. So good point. Um, I don't know though. We'll see whether or not they turn out to be seasonal or not. I feel like I've had some others. Porcelia ornata seem to be more seasonal for me so far. And Laura Philippe, BioLife's here. Thank you so much for trying our complete bioactive substrate. Well, thank you for sending me some. I'm excited to see how it goes. I've got some isopods on it right now. A video is coming out about that this Friday, actually. Since I set up the enclosures for a couple of different isopods in the video about your substrate, I will be, the next video is showing me putting some isopods on them. So I'm excited to see how it goes. So far, the isopods have been on there for a couple of weeks and seem to be doing well. So um, thanks again for sending that. And Shane, yeah, that is something to keep in mind. A lot of people consider don't consider that when they get into isopods. You do have to deal with numbers unless you're selling large numbers of them, or you have something that eats large numbers of them, or something like that. Yeah, so definitely something to think about. Which isopods breed fairly slowly? I like Gestroy for that. Uh, they grow fairly slowly. Once they start breeding, yeah, they breed pretty well, but um, they take a while to grow up, and so even if you get a lot of them, you don't get overrun with them right away. So that's a good one. I think that is good. What are others that breed fairly slowly? I think some of the larger Porcelio are good for that. I think I feel like Porcelio ornatus yellow dot breeds pretty fast, but some of the other Porcelio ornatus don't breed as fast. Porcelio expansus doesn't seem super fast to me. So those are some options. Some strains of Armadillidium vulgare, like the Magic Potion, American Magic Potion, are fairly slow growers and slower breeders. Theropod Hunter, any records of hammerhead worms in the hobby? Are you talking about the flatworms, the terrestrial flatworms? I don't know if anybody keeps those or not. I used to see them in Hawaii. They were really weird creatures, if that's the one you're talking about. And sandy skinks, duckies, that's a good point. Duckies are fairly slow because they reproduce frequently, but they produce small broods. So Luke, I am your father. Do you field collect every year? Um, oh, well, I have to assume, I'm assuming you're talking to me first of all. And are you talking about isopods or something else? It's not uncommon for me to do a limited amount of field collecting. It depends on what it is. I don't really collect like reptiles or anything. I prefer capture bred reptiles, but sometimes with invertebrates, I will field collect them on occasion. Let's see. Yeah. Occasionally, I will field collect insects. Um, it's not extraordinarily common, but I've done it. Like with a mantis or something like that. I've done that. Um, I've field collected a few isopods. My wild type Silisticus convexus are from individuals that I collected, I guess if they're not insects, of course. So Don, I would be sending you. Yeah, yeah. Congrats on the two new ones. The two new tarantulas, Don. That's cool. Hi. Um, let's see. Have you seen green lynx spiders where you live? I don't think I've seen them here. I'm not sure if they exist here or not. I think green lynx spiders are absolutely fantastic, though. I would really like to keep a green lynx spider. And a unique moss a while ago. Ruben, cannot for the life of me idea it. Do you have any advice on guides or resources for North American mosses? I like mosses a lot. I've kept and cultivated a number of them. I don't know a lot about the moss taxonomy. So I don't know really where you would find out about that either, unfortunately. This is kind of a strange experience because I'm watching the chat and I see myself in two different windows. One window is the live window that's recording. The other one is a little bit delayed, and it's kind of weird seeing myself do that. So sorry if I look a little weird. Okay, frosty inverts. What do you think is the max amount of desert beetles I can keep in a 10-gallon tank? And currently have two in there. Um, let's see. Um, you can keep a lot of desert beetles. It kind of depends on which species you're putting in there to some degree and what size they are, because there are species of different sizes. It also depends on what you have in there in terms of substrate, decor, hiding places. I don't think 20 would be too many in most cases. I'll put it that way. You might even be able to get away with more. If you have plenty of hiding places, plenty of good substrate, they're getting enough food. Um, I think you could easily put 20 in a 10-gallon tank and not worry about it. And EE, thank you. I'm excited for Ruby's clutch. Her latest clutch is seems to be doing well and is eating, and I'm excited about it. And Tan San, hello from Hanoi. Whoa, welcome. Glad to see you here. I actually have to feed my babies today, my baby garters today. I fed them on, was it Sunday or Saturday? So it's about time now. I actually have a pinky thawed so I can make some garter grub for them, some food, along with some earthworm. Have to mix that up. It's not fun to mix up, but that's what they like to eat when they're this old, and that's what they can eat. So what I'm gonna have to do. Fed most of the other snakes prior to the live stream. The melanistic garters are getting big. They're starting to put on size. I'm optimistic that they will be breeding size next year. They are a little over a year old now. They were born in April of 2022, so they're just a couple months over, like 14 months old and putting on some size. I think we could get some babies next year. Pretty excited about that. And Gyotaro, I am in the state of Utah. So Ruby, Red Lily Dragon, had 29 babies, but one was stillborn, fully developed, but stillborn. Um, there was, I couldn't quite tell. There was something in there that may have been a slug, but since I've never really seen one before, I'm not sure. It may have just been a little bit of the birth sac because it wasn't really that big. And so I'm not entirely sure if there was one of those. But anyway, 28 live, healthy babies. So Luke, I'm your father. Garter snakes are not as long-lived as some other snakes, but um, they can live 15 years, maybe more sometimes. It's not always that long. In the wild, they say I think between 5 and 10 years, but in a protected environment, they can live longer. So you could potentially have a garter snake for 15, maybe 20 years. I have never had any that long because I haven't had garter snakes long enough for them to reach the end of their lifespan. Because I only got into keeping garter snakes seriously, like I do now. Meaning, when I was a kid, I would catch them for a little while and keep them. You know, that wasn't really, I don't really count that. But actually purchasing captive bred garter snakes with the intent of keeping them for their whole lives and breeding them, that kind of stuff. I only started, when was that? 2019? So not that long ago. So Andy's King saying my blue tongue slugs, meaning infertile eggs, are round or egg-shaped, golden color, and about 1 inch. Okay. Yeah, and I wasn't sure with this one because it was very well, it's transparent essentially. It just looked like the birth sac of a snake, and it was small enough that it could have just been the remains of a birth sac. But it was a little bit bigger than I was expecting it to be. The one that did not make it was in uh, still in the birth sac, and the birth sac was still moist, and it looked very much like that, but much smaller, and nothing was really in it. So I'm kind of just thinking it was a piece of birth sac, and that I've never actually seen a slug from Ruby. Um, the first year when she produced 21 healthy babies, there was one stillborn. Last year when she produced 28, one was still in the birth sac when I found them, but I opened up the birth sac and it started crawling around. It was fine. So, and I tried to do the same with this one, but it had already passed away by the time I found it. So those Porcelio dubosqui have a crazy name, but they're pretty unique. I've never kept them. They look pretty neat. And Aunt Sandy's Kings, the slugs are dry, and that interesting. Okay, yeah, since I've never seen a garter one, I don't really know, but that's good to know because maybe it's the same since blue tongue skinks are ovoviviparous like garters. Could make sense. How many babies does a blue tongue skink have, Sandy, at once, typically? I don't think it's a very large number from what I understand, but I would be curious to see if you have like an average or just what the typical litter range is or something like that. Han San, do you have any tips on keeping Marullinella species? I don't have enough experience with Marullinella species myself. The only true Marullinella I've kept, and it may not even end up being a Marullinella, has been the tricolors, and I haven't had exceptional success with them. I did get them to breed, but I don't think I have any of the adults left. I may have some of the babies left, but I'm not even sure about that, to be honest. I'll have to go check on them again and see how they're doing. Between 1 and 20? Wow. So the range is not as much as it is for garter snakes, but still 20, I never would have said. Um, Never would have said that blue tongues could have that many. That's crazy. It's pretty cool. You know, and Sandy, the someday I think I would like to keep blue tongues. I'm not in a position to do so right now. I don't have the resources and room and whatnot right now, but someday I would like to. And I know someone, because I know you, someone who breeds them. So that may be a thing someday when I have more space and more time. Yep, I have Marullinella species Vietnam, but they got put into Sinodilo, which is why I wasn't including them. They're actually pretty easy. And thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Morel. Yeah, I hope the this next generation. I think I had multiple clutches of babies, so if they survive, then hopefully I can get them going. They are really beautiful. So Ramingo, major discoveries made in the isopod world recently. I think mostly has been some reclassification, like Sinodilo for the Marullinella species Vietnam. A lot of species being reclassified lately. Um, I don't have experience with a lot of the real funky ones. Um, so my most exotic isopod, I don't know. What might that be? It might be the Marullinella species tricolor. And okay, Aunt Sandy, well, Aunt Sandy Skinks. I usually call you Sandy, but I was reading your name, Aunt Sandy Skinks. There. I think it would be cool to get a skink from you someday when we're set up. Prove to you the background isn't fake. You can't hear the bees. You probably can't hear the bees. There are bees all over in these flowers, but I can prove to you the flowers. The background isn't fake. What I can't do is run into it in Madman because this is my deck right here, and so I can't run past this. But I can do this. This would prove that the background isn't fake, right? If I shake it around a little bit, hopefully I don't upset the bees too much doing that. So, Luke, how are your death fanning beetles doing? I just found a larva the other day. I saw something digging around under the substrate and scooped up a bit of substrate and found that um, there was a beetle in there, or a larva in there. It was about an inch long, so not ready to pupate yet. But so they are breeding on that substrate and doing well on that. I expected them to breed on that. They always breed. I think some people get confused about blue death fanning beetles breeding because it's not difficult to get them to produce larvae at all, or to lay eggs. It's not difficult. To get them to produce larvae isn't particularly difficult either. What is more difficult is getting them to pupate successfully, and that is easier now than it used to be. Well, I hope that chainsaw isn't too loud for you. Let me know if it is. Um, so yeah, I did lose a couple of adults recently, which is kind of weird. I'm not sure. They looked like they were larger individuals and larger adults, and I don't really have anything to pinpoint the reason why the two adults died. I still have quite a few others, but I'm not sure what's going on with that. But they did. Otherwise, the colony is doing well. So I do have this microphone that um, may be cutting out some of the chainsaw noise. But if it's not, please let me know. And there's definitely a dog and a cow. That way, my next door neighbor has a cow. And that way, our neighbors have a couple of dogs. So you did hear a cow and you heard some dogs. So glad to hear the chainsaw is not too bad. It's, I think, the same people with the dogs. There's a tree that fell in the field back behind our house, and so that's so some of you were hearing the chainsaw, not much else. Okay, hopefully they're coming down. I'm not using the chainsaw anymore. I don't hear it anymore. So Here, I actually want to see. I don't know if I can do it. Well, Red Lily Dragon, thanks for joining in. Sorry you have to leave, but it was great having you here. Um, I actually want to try to show you. I only have a few minutes, and I want to try to show you the a little bit more of this tree. Okay, so I'm going to switch the camera around in a second here. I'm going to unplug this, and we'll flip this around here, and here we go. Now, can you see? Just look at all the blossoms on this tree. This is a Kentucky yellow wood that I mentioned I would hopefully do a stream when it was in full bloom because it's a gorgeous tree, gorgeous blossoms. Love this tree, and I wanted you all to have a good look at these beautiful, beautiful blossoms. And it smells awesome. It's fantastic. It's a little bit like jasmine, the way it smells. I don't know if you can see all the bees on this. There are bees everywhere. Can you see any of the bees? Absolutely beautiful tree. And I'm not sure how old the tree is because it was pretty big when we arrived here. We got here. I forget how long we've lived here. Is it 9 years or something? 9 years ago this year, I think, and the tree was already here and pretty big. So absolutely lovely tree. One interesting thing about it, we couldn't identify it for years. I only identified it like a couple of years ago, finally, because the owner of the previous owner of the house said it was called a goldenwood, and I like the name. Goldenwood better than yellowwood. Goldenwood just sounds cooler, but I couldn't find it anywhere. And then finally, I used the Seek app, got some pictures of it, and it was Kentucky yellowwood. And they're also sometimes called some other things, and I can't remember the scientific name right now. But it flowers sporadically. So you might get 2 or 3 years when it doesn't flower, and we've seen that where it missed a year, missed 2 years, doesn't flower at all, and then sometimes it does, but it's not like every other year. It's just might miss 2 years once, and then flower for 2 years, and then not flower for a year, and then flower again for 2 years, and then skip 3 years. It's kind of crazy, but very gorgeous when it does. We have picnics and things under the tree when it flowers because it smells beautiful. The buzzing of the bees is just really peaceful and relaxing, and the tree itself is just gorgeous. It's like having a picnic in a fantasy world. So Kentucky yellowwood is what it's called. Yep. So precautions for isopod Romingo. Well, make sure they have enough ventilation, but they're not drying out. Definitely. And then those are the two things that I would say the most. If you can put them in lower down in the house, so they're not like stacked up high near the ceiling, that's another thing you can do. Yeah, this is such a fun tree. We all love it. We hope to have more trees like this wherever we end up living in the future because I don't know. I wish I could just put some of the smell on the live stream for you. This fragrance is fantastic. And you can smell it all the way from the front yard. I mean, it's very fragrant and beautiful. And it does help the bees for sure, including native bees because there are native bees that come too, not just the honeybees. So my time is just about up, everyone. But I wanted to thank you all for joining me. Thank you for the super chats, Mr. and Mrs. Morelia. Thank you all for your questions and comments. Thank you to my patrons for sending questions in. Appreciate that. And Jonah Martin, a question about my Daphnia. The type of Daphnia I have is not quite clear. They were sold to me as Russian red Daphnia, but a scientific name was not given. And but I've had them for 10 or 12 years, and they're thriving. So whatever they are, they're pretty successful Daphnia. Yeah, I wish I knew more about what they are. Thank you, everyone, and have a good one. And be sure to check out my video that comes in on Friday. And everybody say good night to the Kentucky yellowwood, this gorgeous, gorgeous tree. Catch you later.